how did you put two and two together with your remarkable thesis about Mayberry and nostalgia? What was the specific inspiration?
Well, I've always been a huge fan of documentaries that are like led by people who just love something, whether it's Marvel, whether it's Comic Cons. That's all kind of fascinating to me. People dressing up, and so kind of connecting the two of going when you have people that are dressing up as these characters and they're constantly kind of reverting back or remembering back to a better time. You connect basically the nostalgia idea with what's going on today. And what is that? How much deeper can I go with that? So there's just so many different levels
Yeah.
to it. So
So one of the more remarkable statements in the film was that Mayberry was created out of a nostalgia for simpler times when it premiered in 1960. How do you think people mix up the notion of what Mayberry represents with the times and the context when it came out?
a number of people still think that the Andy Griffith Show was set in the 60s and that it was just a simple show to kind of escape what was going on outside of their doors. But if you really kind of like dive into it and watch how the people interact, and then there's been talk about that Andy kind of Opie is Andy as a kid, so you know it's kind of Mayberry and the idea of going back in time through the eyes of a child. So that would take him back another 30 years. But I think at the end of the day, it was just an attempt to tell a really good story. And, all the writers, including Andy Griffith, kind of drew from their past and put together one of the best sitcoms ever.
What, in your opinion, scares people about living in the now, preferring to find comfort in fictional places like Mayberry versus the reality of their circumstance?
I think the idea of change right now, I think the idea of not knowing what's coming around the corner. I think when we're nostalgic about the past and simpler times, there's a comfort there. We know what to expect. We know the people around us. We know the community around us. We have our comfort zone. It's our self-made, I guess, utopia. But for the people that aren't in that situation, you end up kind of trying to escape into something that might give you that same kind of feeling. So
Hmm.
if it's a group over here that's kind of like-minded, or if it's movies,
Right.
anything to kind of escape, to get into kind of a utopian mindset. So I think we still need to be able to find those escapes, because I really think they kind of help us in the future. They kind of help us drive us towards the future. They kind of make us feel good for a small time. And then that helps us, maybe spread that good feeling to other people. And we kind of need that still today, but I think there's just so many other outlets out there now
Very good.
to be able to try to find that.
The impersonators had a reverence for the show that was touching. What was your perspective on them? And how much longer do you think that the act can go on, considering that most of the adults who watch the show are dying off?
Like I said earlier, I was totally engrossed with the idea of people dressing up. So just to put it out there, my wife and I own a children's theater. So in our children's theater, we have tons of costumes. All right. Being on stage doing a show is one thing. To put on a costume and be somebody else out in the public is a whole nother, I think it's just a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
So what I find fascinating is that when people do that, they're just having a good time. And when they're around these other people and they see these characters or people that are like the characters, they're starting to have a good time and they're laughing and they're telling jokes. And it is really such an amazing, positive thing. And so to watch that for like 5 years, I think there's so much power in that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to initially start telling their story, like all their stories, go to all their houses and kind of get the behind the scenes. Um, but there's so many of them, and I just ran out of time. But they've just kind of opened up this whole other mindset and this whole other world to me, going, "Hey, we only live once. Go do this, have fun, find your people, and if you can make them laugh, then that's a really good day."
The second part of the question, do you find it waning? Do you find it on its way down because of the generational thing?
I think about it. I know that a lot of my friends in the 40-year range, we grew up watching the show.
Right,
But how many of us have had our kids watch the show?
right,
Not nearly as many as our parents did.
right.
Because kind of at the end of the documentary, you end up hearing saying there's so many other things for kids to watch and see and interact with now that I think it's gonna stay around with our generation.
Yeah.
But
Who knows?
probably not too far beyond that.
Yeah.
But still, even if that does that, that's a really good run, because that'll
It's
be
a hell of a
another
run.
40, 50 years plus the other 60.
Right. Andy Griffith has had such an interesting career, even though he's mostly known for portraying Sheriff Taylor. What do you think of his performance in Face in the Crowd, and how do you think it informs the rest of his career?
He was such an impactful and powerful actor in that movie.
Yeah.
I think I've seen some people say recently that they just watched it and they could not stand it because they didn't like Andy at all in it. But then you see the range of what he can do as an actor. So I think it was tough for him coming out of the Andy Griffith Show to find other things. And then when he did find other movies or shows, they weren't the biggest hits. But I think Facing the Crowd really just showed his range.
Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
And and I think he's always been a part of American culture. So when he came back as Matlock, we all kind of gravitated to Matlock, and when they brought Don Knotts in on some of the episodes, and started doing some of the same scenes from the Andy Griffith Show, it's just you can't help but laugh and enjoy that part of life that day because of those two people.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2021.